Hi, I'm George Thomas, W5JDX with AmateurLogic.tv. The Icom IC-7760 is an all-around great transceiver with what I consider a really exceptional feature. That is, you can separate the controller from the RF deck. There are several different methods of connecting the control head and the RF deck. The easiest, and always the first method you'll want to try, is using a direct connection. Each controller must be paired with the RF deck initially. Regardless of where you're going to use it, the first thing you'll do is connect the controller directly to the RF deck. Simply connect the controller's RF deck port and the RF deck's controller port directly with the controller cable that Icom supplies. All IC-7760 controllers must be paired with an RF deck before the units will be able to communicate with each other, regardless of which connection method you plan to use. Once they've been paired, you're ready to explore some of the other connection options. For all the network settings we're going to talk about in this video, I refer to the IC-7760 technical report available at this link. The LAN connector on the rear of the RF deck is used to connect to your local area network, where you might also have the internet available. If you wish to connect to a Wi-Fi network, you can use a third-party external Wi-Fi adapter connected to the LAN port. Using your local area network, you're able to take the controller away from the RF deck for remote operation. You could leave the RF deck in the shack and take the controller into the house. Connect them both over the LAN network. Additionally, you can use more than one controller with a single RF deck. However, the RF deck may only be controlled by one of the controllers at a time. The total possible number of extra controllers is unknown to me at this time, but I do know it's been tested with up to 5 controllers on a single RF deck. There are many different possible configurations for connecting the IC-7760 to a network. The simplest is using your home LAN network connection with both the controller and the RF deck in the same network segment. This is the most common home networking situation. You simply connect a Cat5e or higher cable from your network switch to the RF deck connection on the rear of the controller. Then connect another Cat5e cable from your network switch to the LAN port of the RF deck. This way you can take the controller wherever you like, in the shack or in the home, living room, bathroom, or kitchen. You'll get the same functionality as you would with a direct connection between the controller and the RF deck. Now let's talk for a moment about network speed requirements. This will be from the controller to the RF deck. We need at least 2 megabits per second. Now for download, which will be the transfer of data from the RF deck to the controller, if you're using one of the USB, line out, accessory, or LAN settings is set to IF, you're going to need at least 7 megabits per second of download speed. However, if all the USB, line out, accessory, and LAN output settings are set to AF, you'll only need 4 megabits per second of download speed. Once you've connected the controller and the RF deck to your local area network, you need to make a few settings. We're going to use the most common settings people will use at home to connect to their IC-7760. Press the menu button, go to Set, go to Network right here at the top, DHCP. Tap that to set DHCP on. There is one setting we need to make: controller connection via LAN. Then connection route. Since most typical home networks are going to have all connections in the same segment, we'll choose LAN in same segment. If you have a more complicated setup at home, you may need to make another choice. Now power cycle the unit so that the settings take effect. Power it back up. It'll take a moment for the two units to negotiate with each other, and then we're on the air. Now I can take the controller anywhere on my home network, plug it in, and it just connects and works. As a matter of fact, that's the way I run my IC-7760 most of the time. I rarely do direct connections anymore. Next, we're going to take the controller a little bit further away from the RF deck. I'm going to set up an internet connection to do this experiment. I asked my friend Tommy, N5ZNO, if he would help. The first thing we got to do is connect the controller directly into the RF deck to change some settings. We won't be able to do this over the LAN since some of the changes would cause our LAN to disconnect. There are many different ways you can create internet connections to accommodate most use cases. We're going to use the one that's probably the most typical: internet by on both sides port forward. Some of the settings will be for the controller alone. Some other settings will be loaded into the RF deck using the controller. The only way you can perform these settings or change any of them is to make a direct connection using the supplied cable between the controller and the controller port on the rear of the RF deck. This procedure must be done with every controller you want to use with the RF deck. Menu, Set, Network. Let's go back to the top. We can use DHCP if we want, or we can set a static IP address. We need to change the connection route. Go down to Controller Connection via LAN, Connection Route, Internet on both sides, port forward. This is the setting that is most common and is going to work in the majority of cases. Next, we need to set each item of the RF deck side settings. We'll put in an address for the RF deck, which I've already done. That's the address that the RF deck is located on the network here in my shack. And we'll also need the subnet mask of our LAN network. We need to enter the default gateway. That's 192.168.0.1 here on my network. We'll back out of that, go to port forwarding settings. The first ones we'll do are the RF deck side. Write down all these numbers or view them while you're looking at the port forwarding settings setup screen of your router where the RF deck will be located. We will use this IP address and forward these ports using these protocols. So any traffic that comes over the internet to this router that's knocking on one of these ports will be forwarded to the RF deck. Here's how I forward ports in my router. Yours may be different. I type the IP address of my router in the address bar of a web browser on the same LAN network as the RF deck. Typically that'll be something like 192.168.0.1 or 192.168.1.1, although it could be something else. You'll be presented with the router's home page. I've got the choice of basic or advanced settings. I choose advanced, then advanced setup. I'm going to show you how to forward the first port, and you should be able to do the others after seeing this. My router has a choice for port forward, port triggering. I'll choose that. Next, I choose the port forwarding option. The service name is currently on FTP. I'll just leave it there for now. Some other routers might allow you to name it at this stage. This one doesn't. Server IP address will be the IP address of our RF deck. Mine is 192.168.0.125. We'll click Add. Now it's added an entry here for FTP, which is what we selected. The port information is wrong, but that's okay. We'll click Edit Service. I'll change service name to IC-7760 RF-1. Protocol for this particular port is going to be TCP and UDP. Some other routers might call this ALL. I'll set the external port to 50101. That's what the rig told us. My router has the option checked for use the same port range for internal port. That means internal port will be entered automatically. For some other routers, you might have to enter that yourself. I click Apply. Now we have an entry for port 50101 using the correct protocols, going to the RF deck's IP address. I just showed you the first one there. Here are the additional port numbers that you'll need along with their protocols. Set these up and you should be good to go at this end. In a moment, Tommy will show you how he set up port forwarding for the controller on his network. I've simulated connecting the controller to Tommy's LAN network at his house. It's not going to be able to connect to the RF deck now. We'll eventually have a little message pop up that tells us, okay, we knew that. I'm going to enter the settings in the controller before we take it to Tommy. Now we'll go back into the menu to Set, to Network, back to the top. We should set DHCP to off. You can see I've entered two IP addresses that Tommy and I coordinated to use on his LAN. For IP address LAN, we entered 192.168.1.98, press enter. We need another IP address for the controller. For this one, we're using 192.168.1.99. Enter it the same way I did the first one. I had previously entered these, so that's why they auto-populated when I turned the unit on. And we'll need the IP address of the RF deck that's on my LAN. That is the IP address I entered earlier while there was a direct connection between the controller and the RF deck. We also need Tommy's subnet mask and Tommy's default gateway. You notice his network uses 192.168.1.1. Mine used .0.1. That's just a different in our LAN settings. We're putting Tommy's settings in here since the controller will be at his end. We need a primary and secondary DNS. I use 1.1.1.1 and 8.8.8.8 for Cloudflare and Google. For controller connection via LAN, I had already selected Internet by on both sides port forward. We're not using a wireless LAN. If we were, we could turn that on and then would be allowed to set an audio buffer size, but we won't need that for connection over our wired network. We've already looked at the RF deck side settings. Those were for my network here because that's where the RF deck will be located. Choose port forward settings, then connection destination, RF deck WAN address. This will be my internet-facing IP address here at my home. I've got it blurred out because I really don't want to share that. You shouldn't share yours either. In many cases, you may not have a static WAN or Internet IP address. In those cases, you could use a third-party dynamic DNS service. Instead of entering a number in here, we could just put your dynamic DNS address. As an example, if you have an account with a dynamic DNS service named mydns.com, I might request the address radio.mydns.com. I apologize if anybody actually has that address. We can enter that here instead of a numeric IP address. Then port information, RF deck side. I've already set that in my router. We've already looked at that. Port information controller side. Tommy will need to set this in his LAN network router. You may remember we had two IP addresses for the controller, a .98 and a .99 address. So Tommy will need to set up these two addresses to forward these 5 ports with these protocols. One important note, using the settings we've shown, you cannot use an internet service provider that uses CGNAT. CGNAT is Carrier Grade Network Address Translation. This is used by most cell phone companies. Even some fiber and cable internet could use CGNAT. That's not going to work. In the case of the cell phone, you won't be able to change that. Also, Starlink and other satellite internet providers use CGNAT. In most cases, that won't work either. If your ISP only provides CGNAT, you'll need a virtual private network, which we're not covering in this video. Now I'm going to take the controller to Tommy, where he can plug it into the network at his house, and we'll see if they talk.
Well, I got the controller from George. Got it here. It's all pre-configured by him on that side. So let's hook it up and see what happens. I will turn it around so we can see the connections. Got the power cord here. This is just a little wall wart that was supplied with the radio, plugging in the 12 volts. And my network cable that hooked up to my switch. And I've got this microphone from George as well, so let's hook it up. Power it on. Should work fine, I hope. It's thinking about it. Hey, look. Well, let's find a little clear channel over here close by. See if it'll tune. It tuned. You see I've got no antenna hooked up to it. The radio's here. I just hooked it up to my internet connection. I did have to open some ports. So I got the ones from George. He messaged me and sent them to me to open. So I did them just like that. And here's a picture of how they're set up. Pretty basic stuff. Most of your routers will do that. Let's see if we can find anybody on Parks on the Air. Oh, there we go. See if we can make a contact to this guy. This is in Alabama, I think. November 5 Zulu, November Oscar. QSL, thanks. This is Tommy here, Tango Oscar Mike Yankee in Mississippi. You sound great here too, 5'9".
Okay, Tommy. Thanks for hunting and take care.
Well, that's pretty cool. It's really fast too. Let me get some audio of 7220. Let me get some off my rig. Compare.
Thank you, Parks on the Air. Thank you, Parks on the Air. Thank you.
You can hear there's very little latency in the audio coming back from George's, where the receiver is. It's really pretty amazing. That's very cool stuff.